briefly go over some of the important aspects in the history of oil painting. And oil painting itself is such has so much history, and painting is such a rewarding process. It goes back over 600 years. That's how enduring the process of painting has been for artists going back so long in time, even further to the cave paintings 17,000 years ago. That hand, that red hand on the wall to say, I am here. This is me. This is my story. And that's why we think that painting as an art form is just one of the best ways for storytelling, for sharing our cultural heritage. And painting is so relevant. If you want to learn more about cave paintings, I highly recommend the film The Cave of Forgotten Dreams by Werner Herzog. Really fascinating, the French caves of Lascaux, where they go over the discovery of those. So check that out if you haven't seen that documentary, The Cave of Forgotten Dreams. But moving on into the present day, modern painters of today have so much more access to color space. It's amazing the developments in science and technology that afford us such a wider array of pigments, materials, and because of that, really painting is relevant, and it continues to be so since we have so much really great technology and advancements in the world of painting. What you want to go down though to the basics of oil paint, like what is oil paint made from? And it really just comes from flaxseed. It's such a humble, such a just a pure, natural, authentic raw material. And it's the linseed oil, refined linseed oil, that is the binder in a majority of our artist grade and our 1980 oil colors. We use safflower oil for a few of our brightest whites, but linseed oil is the main binder of choice that we use for our paints. And fun fact, our linseed oil is sourced here in Montana, actually, locally grown. And it's so interesting how the flax has so many uses. It's used in vitamins, oils. It's the linen that we paint on, and then it's also what goes into the binder for our paint. So it's just all encompassing. The flaxseed is really at the heart of the materials that go into your oil paint. And what's beautiful about it is how non-toxic and just natural it is. You're not using chemicals, petroleums, or any type of plastics when you're just painting with oils and refined linseed oil. So you can feel really good about that from both the environment and your own personal safety. Wow, because painting spans such a long period of time, we like to break it up into three main eras of painting. You have your classical, which is, your we sometimes call these like dirt colors because they're iron oxide pigments. They are pulled from the earth, and these are what the beginning or the first masters of oil paint had. And if you look at the range in the axis of color space, you don't have any bright reds. You don't have a good blue. You have a pretty muted yellow, and then you have a lot of those dark, intense, rich earth tones. And when you look at the work of the classical era and the Renaissance, you can really see how those painters had to work with that, and that's why you have that the layering style with an indirect approach, building up luminosity in your layers and building a painting that's really realistic through glazing and optical effects. That was something that the classical era really tuned into. But then you get into the Impressionists and the era of Impressionism. That era is when things really took off for painters. You often associate Van Gogh, Monet, all of the more, you get into more of a very celebration of color. And this was all in thanks to the Industrial Revolution and how we started putting all sorts of metals and minerals and different materials into the hot furnaces. And sometimes by complete accident, these beautiful pigments came about. And you can really see that in the work of the Impressionists, how they have opaque, bright colors. And that was also when painters got tubed paint. That was around the same time that the tube started to be more commonplace for painters, whereas before you would have to mix and grind your paint that you were using for the day, or if you were fancy, you had an assistant mix and grind your paints for you. But the invention of the tube was so liberating for the Impressionists because they could finally take their paints into the field. They could go on location and just take in the natural scenery with their eyes and put it directly on the canvas. And that's one reason they're just so admirable, the way that the Impressionists really embraced all the modern revolutions. And moving then into the modern era, things get even more intense in terms of the access to color space. You have artists like Brian Rutenberg shown on camera, where you have intense high key colors. You have colors that are more difficult to pronounce as well, like dioxazine, quinacridone, phthalo. These colors are all unlike the colors for the Impressionists. The modern organic colors come from organic chemistry. They're carbon based and they're made in labs. And this advancement in technology has taken painting even further. Modern painters today have so much more access to the color and color space than our painters before us. And I think that the old masters would probably be really jealous if if like Da Vinci or any of the greats, Rembrandt, could see the intensity of the colors we have today. I think they would be amazed and they'd probably want to use them too. Um, we always like to give a brief introduction into the history of painting because it does lead into some of the color demonstrations I'm about to show on camera. Because you want to compare how the mineral colors of the Impressionists differ from the modern organic colors of the modern day pigments. And one of the things you can often think about is how the way they behave with other paints and the mixtures you can get when you're crafting a palette. You want to really think about if you're choosing a mineral based or if you're going for a modern organic color, because it can really influence the way your secondary and tertiary colors mix, the way your paint behaves when mixed with white. I'm going to show here on our camera what we have is cadmium red medium, which is a mineral. And then we have naphthol red, which is a modern organic. And these are both wonderful reds. I think they both are very helpful. What's interesting about them is how they look identical straight out of the tube. Like here is our cadmium red. And then here is our naphthol red side by side. And as we can see, these are very, very similar. Very nice primary red. In fact, you might even not be able to distinguish very much of a difference straight out of the tube. Cadmium might be just a little bit denser, a little bit more opaque if that's your style. But Visually, they are very, very close to one another. But when we mix them with white, things are going to change quite a bit. So I'm going to get a really nice dollop of titanium white out so we can really open up this color and explore its tint. Let's start with cadmium and see where that goes. So you can see here, that's a very, very muted, very beautiful, soft pink that we get with the cadmium. I would think this would be perfect for landscape or like subtle portraiture. If you were wanting to capture the naturalistic beauty of a landscape, I think cadmium's always a great color for that because it grays down more when mixed with white. But the naphthol, on the other hand, when it gets mixed with white, we end up with a much brighter pink. One I would say that this is cleaner, brighter, and just retains the intensity of the color much more. So if you were maybe doing something that required more of a high tinting strength and intensity of color, you'd probably want to consider a modern organic like naphthol red as opposed to a mineral color like cadmium. Oh, those are just so pretty. I love seeing these reds when they open up into different pinks. There you have it. Two very different results when you're choosing your red. In fact, the naphthol is a lot stronger. I feel like I needed a lot less of the pigment to get to a similar tint between these two. It'll just much more quickly overpower your colors. Some people might be familiar with phthalos and how they are very strong and can be very overpowering where you need to keep them far away from all your other colors on the palette. We're actually going to check out some phthalo next in the next color demonstration. Because sometimes we have a variety of wonderful green oil colors, but there's a lot of people that really prefer to mix their own greens because you can get so many different shades and different temperatures. Similarly to the last demonstration, we're going to be working with two mineral and two modern combinations. Our mineral combo for this one is going to be cadmium yellow. Once again, another cadmium. This is cadmium yellow medium. And then we're going to choose Viridian as its sister color. I love Viridian. This is one of my favorite greens that we make because it just has so much. Its transparency is really beautiful, but it also has a wonderful texture to it. When we make this at the Gamblin factory, our Viridian pigment, when it comes off the mill, it goes in ribbons that are so beautiful because of the structure of the pigment. None of our other paints behave that way when coming off of the three-roll mill. And fun fact for anyone out there, we are right now at the Gamblin factory while we're recording this. Right below my feet is the color factory where we make paints all year round, all week long. It might look like a cozy living room, but we're actually at the Gamblin factory. So the other combo we're going to do is with Hansa Yellow Light, which is a very intense modern pigment. It is so bright. It is so great for greens and oranges for that reason. And its sibling color we're going to use with it is phthalo green. Now, I'm going to be really careful with this and put a really small little dab of this phthalo for this color mixing because, like I mentioned earlier, the phthalo is very, very strong in its strength over other colors. Now, this, ooh, so nice. This would be so perfect for a springtime landscape, this cadmium yellow medium and viridian mixture. It has great warmth to it. It has such a really lovely undertone. But still, once again, like the last demonstration, it's going to be much more of a muted result. It's going to have something that doesn't pack a ton of punch to it, but is still beautiful regardless. And then next up, this combo, it's like electric by comparison with the Hansa yellow light and phthalo green. That it's such a difference. If you were really looking for a color that has much more of chroma and intensity, these modern organics are going to get you there because so much quicker. Because as you saw, I used barely any phthalo green in that mix with the Hansa yellow light. Oh, this is just going to make me want to go plein air painting after this with all these greens. I'm going to have to save these sheets for later and go outside. It's actually going to be a really beautiful day in Oregon here. One other really unique color I like to mention to people is your black and how that can really influence your color mixing when you're looking to not lighten a color, but you're looking to shade a color. You always want to select a black that is going to do the job right for you. And lots of painters go straight for ivory or Mars, and that's fine. Oftentimes, when you're starting off, that's what's mentioned on the supply list. But one of our real special colors here is our chromatic black. Chromatic black is a complementary mix of two modern organic colors. It's a mix of a deep quinacridone red with a cool temperature and a warm green. And one of the great things about it is how it stays neutral when it's being mixed with colors, so you don't have things going warm or cool. It's one of my favorite blacks for that reason, and it's just so lovely. And it's amazing how this black is produced from red and green, and you get this beautiful black. But for anyone out there that doesn't have chromatic black or would like to try mixing it themselves, I find it to be really satisfying to mix your own chromatic black. You can always get the tubed version, which is nice. Our color mixers here at the factory, this is one of their most complicated colors that they have to make because they have to get the pigments just right. And because the quinacridone pigment is sensitive to heat, it can't develop too long on the 3-roll mill. So it is a very tricky color to produce on a mass scale, but our team here is wonderful at that. But you can get a similar result with any type of complementary mix. And some artists will do maybe alizarin and viridian as one example, but we find the quinacridone and the phthalo green creates a really similar result to what we have for our chromatic black. And once again, you might notice how I dispensed only a little bit of green on the palette because with phthalo, you really don't need a lot to get the result that you're going after. I'm going to take a little dab of green and start mixing, and really quickly you're getting there. In fact, right now it's looking a little purpley when we look at the transparency, so we're going to put a little bit more dash of green in there. It's one thing I love so much about these modern organic colors is their transparency, and they just are so stunning. They also stain, though. If you get it on your favorite sweater, it might be done for. Oh, and just look at that. It's so pretty. And there, I think we're getting pretty close. I might, if I were to really perfect this, I might add a little bit more green, but you get the idea how, mixing your own chromatic black is so satisfying, but we also offer it as a reliable pre-mixed version in the tube for if you ever want that. And it just makes other colors really keep their beauty when you're shading them. I'll do a quick example with Radiant Violet. which is one of our, if you're not familiar with the Radiant colors, they are our special tints. They're all at a Munsell value 6 on the 7, excuse me, Munsell value 7 on the Munsell value scale system. And they're a full range of really great colors that are based off of the modern organic range. And I'm going to show how this radiant violet looks when it's mixed with the chromatic black. Oh, you just get this beautiful shade color. And just for funsies, let's do a little bit of just regular quinacridone red with the chromatic black. And that is so, oh, this is such a nice shade color when you take the quinacridone and open it up with some of that. You get just such a more vibrant dark than if you were using Mars or Ivory Black. You just get such more juicy, saturated color in the result. Okay. I could just push paint around all day. We could be here all day on Zoom doing this if we wanted to. And I'm sure everyone out there that is, oil painters know how the act of color mixing is so satisfying. And some people really revel in the joy of that. But we do have so many pre-mixed colors, shortcuts, if you would, like chromatic black and the Radiant series that do help you save time, especially if you're a plein air painter out in the field. That can be invaluable when you need to save time because those clouds are only going to be in that spot for maybe 25 minutes and then they're going to be gone and you might not have time to be mixing and mixing the perfect shade of blue. So they're invaluable for that reason. If anyone has not already checked it out, the experience color section of our website is fantastic at gamblincolors.com. Up on the main menu, experience color, you can find countless color related articles there from chromatic black, the radiance, our temperature biased whites and grays. And we have a lot of really great painting examples at the website. So if you haven't already gone there, there's a wealth of information. Start at the color section. That's my favorite one. But there's other sections too for tips and techniques, mediums, etc., which leads us into the next section of this demonstration, which is our breakdown of all of the mediums. I'm going to mention right now how a lot of the products I'm talking about are in this must-have set that we have here. It's a great little set. It has everything you need from solvent at the beginning to your mediums to your varnish at the end. And we designed this not only to be great for traveling and stuff, but also as a if you're just starting off and you're not sure where to start, and there can be so many different options out there. It can be really overwhelming. So we designed this to just have a little bit of everything to get you started, or if you're on the road and you just need to have all the stuff. Oh, I think someone asked a really great question. I just got a note of, before we move on to the mediums demo, is how can you tell which paint is mineral and which is modern or organic? That's a great question. At the website, we actually have a fantastic article on that under experience color section that I mentioned earlier. Look for the page that says mineral versus modern. And it kind of gives you a breakdown very similar to what I just showed you live on camera, but it also has a great organizational chart that lists all of these different pigments, where they fall on that. And it also shows off the classical, impressionist, and the modern palettes we were showing at the beginning of the talk. So if anyone out there is just curious or really wants to get to the bottom of which colors are my modern colors, which ones are my minerals, go to that section of the experience color on our website, and that's going to get you all set up with the info that you need. Okay, so the must-have set. We've got a little bit of everything in this kit for you, and I'd say one of the most useful things is probably Gamsol, our solvent that we have. Gamsol has been a real liberator for painters. It just is odorless, has a majority of the harmful aromatics removed. It does not require extensive ventilation either. Usually cracking a window, having a fan going, more than enough if you're going to be painting with Gamsol. It's a world away from turpentine, like back in the day. That was very harsh, really toxic, required extensive ventilation. Gamsol's really been a huge game changer. And we formulate many of our products with Gamsol for that reason. We recommend it as a great brush cleaner. It can clean surfaces. It can save the day when you get some paint on your favorite sweater. Gamsol is going to be there to help get that stain out of there, unless it's phthalo green. But one thing you always want to remember when you are working with solvents is how you want to keep the lid on it at all times because it is evaporating while you're using it, or when you mix it in with your paints, it evaporates out. So good practice is always keep the lid on your bottle when not in use. So I'm just going to set this off to the side now. We have a lot of mediums. I think a lot of people sometimes ask if Gamsol by itself should be used as the medium. And although that works, it will, a little bit of Gamsol goes a long way to relax your paint, and you can get a very nice wash or block in of your composition that way. We would encourage people not to rely on Gamsol too much as the only medium because when you start adding a lot to your paint, it weakens the paint because it just dissolves the linseed oil binder and then it evaporates out completely without leaving behind any residue or any binder to keep the paint film flexible and strong. So a better idea would be to choose a painting medium, which can or may not contain Gamsol within it. And I'm going to go over a few of the best options we have. I'd say one of the best, the most classical is linseed oil, refined linseed oil. Same binder that's in the paint. It's included in the must-have set as well. You get a little bottle of linseed oil. I like linseed because it just smells so wonderful, just mild vegetable aroma. It gives paint a really nice creamy consistency. So I'm going to show with ultramarine blue is going to be our demonstration color for these mediums. What's really nice about linseed too is how a little bit goes a long way. I'm just going to pour a pretty small amount onto the palette here to demonstrate. And you immediately, even with just a little bit, really makes the paint get more transparent, has so much more flow off the brush. We do design our colors to be workable straight out of the tube without modification. Sometimes people ask that. They think, am I supposed to use medium? Is it like required? The answer to that is no. You can just work with the paint straight out of the tube. You don't need to add medium. We try to make it buttery and creamy enough that it's gonna, flow off the brush just fine or under the knife. But if you wanted to give your paint a little bit more of a creamy feel, a little bit more fluid, more flow off the brush and add some transparency, just a little dab of linseed oil will do ya. It's so versatile in that regard. You can also dilute it further with Gamsol if you wanted to make the linseed oil even thinner, like maybe for more glazes or washes. And that brings us into the second fluid I want to discuss, which is Galkyd Light. Galkyd Light is one of our most popular mediums just because of how fast it dries, how it has a really nice low viscosity fluid to it. This is made, unlike linseed oil, this is made from a soybean derived alkyd resin. Alkyd resin is a more contemporary resin. However, it's been widely adopted by many oil paint manufacturers for a variety of reasons. It's very compatible with all of the other drying oils like linseed, safflower, walnut. It plays nicely with all of those. It is more flexible and more durable, actually, than those drying oils I just mentioned. When we've done flexibility testing on aged samples, the alkyd actually outperforms in that regard and is more resistant to cracking. I think the big thing though, and the reason why Galkid Light and regular Galkid, by the way, there's also Galkid, which is a little bit of a thicker version of this fluid medium. That the speedy dry time is one of the big reasons why these Galkid products are so popular. And they really, really can be a lifesaver when you're on a commission, when you've got deadlines, or when you're just in the flow and you're really excited about the painting you're working on and just can't wait to get going on the next layer. One of the other nice things about Galkid is how we can add a lot of it to the paint. Unlike linseed oil, you just want to use a little bit. You don't want to add too much. Otherwise, you can end up with some very, very slow dry time results if you add a lot of pure linseed oil to your paint. Galkid Light, on the other hand, you can add a very high proportion of it to your colors. Like you can end up with a much more fluid result, as you're seeing here, increased transparency and a faster dry time result. One question we often get is how much can I add to the paint? Like, what's the limit? Especially with products like Gamsol in particular, we were talking about earlier how adding too much Gamsol to the paint can really weaken the stability. And that's something we get is like, how much is too much? It's really, you can't know the answer to that until your painting is really old and cracked. We would just say use as little as it takes with both pure linseed or pure Gamsol. Use small amounts so you don't put too much in. However, with the Galkid mediums, you can actually add as much as you'd like or as little as you'd like too. Just a little bit will help a stiff paint get more flow. And like I mentioned earlier, the way that the alkyd mediums like Galkyd and Galkyd Lights speed up the dry time, thin layers can be dry within just a few days. 48 to 72 hours, which is so nice when you're working on a deadline. I would even go so far as to say if you're working with iron oxide colors like raw umber, burnt umber, those pigments that have natural manganese secatives that just already on their own dry very, very rapidly, and then you add a medium like Galkyd or Galkyd Light to them, you might have a layer that is dry overnight, actually. That's just how rapid the dry time result can get. There's one more fluid that we can talk about, and that one is going to be kind of the special one. I'm going to put the lid back on my Galkyd light. Since it has Gamsol in it, we want to keep that closed and shut in between uses. And let's get a new palette pad here so we have plenty of space. One thing about fluids is they do go all over the place. I always recommend having a little cup or a little dish or something to dispense your fluid into, and then you can mix that into your paints, or you can get a little dab on your brush and just mix it into the paint as you go. Some people ask that if should they be pre-mixing it all the time, like adding the same amount into every pile of paint, or do I just wing it and use it when intuitively? The answer is both. you can do it either way. It really depends on your personal style in terms of how much and how you get the medium into your paint. The last fluid I want to talk about is actually one of my favorites. It's solvent-free fluid. This one is a mixture with that same alkyd resin oil we mentioned, the soybean alkyd resin, and safflower oil. So unlike Galkyd Light, instead of having Gamsol in it, solvent-free fluid is just pure oils, just safflower and alkyd. And what I really like about this is how you don't need to have ventilation since there's no solvent involved in this. You don't have to worry about breathing in anything harmful. And unlike linseed oil, which is also solvent-free fluid is a little bit of a faster dryer. So if we were to compare, linseed oil is the slowest option you have. And if you want something even slower, you could try safflower, but that will take a long time to dry. Solvent-free fluid is several days faster by comparison. It does a really nice job of helping keep up with the pace of painting, but it doesn't dry too rapidly, is the nice part. If you're the type of person who likes a little bit more time to blend, maybe a few extra days before things get tacky, it has a really good open time and a moderate drying rate. And then Galkyd and Galkyd Light have the fastest accelerant in the dry time aspect. So there you have it. We have three great fluids we just showed. And I think depending on your preferences for dry time or transparency, one might work better over the other, but the nice part is that you just have options and you're not stuck with just one thing that you can use with your paint. It's really nice. So moving on from fluids, the next part is actually my favorite type of medium, which are our gel mediums. And what I really like about gels is how when you dispense them onto the palette, they stay put. They don't slide, they don't glide, they don't misbehave or run around and then drip onto your arm or something like that. Now, there's a couple of options, and they're going to be relatively similar to what we just saw with the fluids. I want to start first with Galkyd gel. This is a similar soybean alkyd resin gel product, just like Galkyd Light. The biggest difference, though, is how it's going to maintain the body and the thickness of your paint. Galkyd gel has Gamsol in it, just as a clarification. So you will need to have at least a little ventilation if you're working with this. But you can see there how this is a really thick medium. And it really has a great ability to maintain the crispy marks and if you like to maintain brushwork and you like to see the hand of the artist, if that's something that's important for your work, then these gel mediums are really useful for that. Let's see, we used Radiant Violet last time. So this time I'm going to choose our Radiant Turquoise because it just looks really, really, really pretty on camera. Some people might be wondering, because we have Galkyd, Galkyd Light, what's the difference between them? Whenever it says the light version, Lite, you can probably assume that it's going to have a little bit of a thinner viscosity. And later on, we're going to show you the light version of the Galkyd gel as well. That applies to the fluids as well. Galkyd is thicker, more viscous, and then Galkyd Light is a thinner, more low viscosity. And then Galkyd gel, this is just a really, really thick gel. Oh, so nice. And you can tell too, it extends the paint without having it run everywhere like those other samples I was showing. And you get some really nice marks with it. Like regular Galkid and Galkid Light, Galkid Gel is a rapid dryer, so it's going to take your painting a lot further, faster. For that reason, you can expect layers to dry within a much shorter period of time than if you were using paint straight out of the tube. So it's really useful for that type of impasto application. We have another gel though that's called solvent-free gel. Now, just like the solvent-free fluid, as the name implies, there's no Gamsol in this gel. It's solvent-free. It does not require any ventilation, unlike the Galkid I have here on the palette. It's a slower drying one though, just like before. It doesn't dry as quickly as the Galkid products do, but it is better than if you were just using paint alone straight out of the tube. What I think is so satisfying about this particular gel is how it is so buttery. It has like the same consistency as the paint, and really you get such a softness with the paint. And similar to linseed oil too, you only need a little bit of this gel. I squeezed out a lot for demonstration purposes because it's just so satisfying. This one is just like solvent-free fluid, where it's a mixture of alkyd resin, the soybean alkyd resin, and safflower oil. And then we thicken it up into a gel-like structure. So its ingredients are really simple, just like the others, just two basic ingredients, just pure oil, really. And I'm gonna add just a little bit of this to my paint pile. One precaution about the solvent-free gel is that if you use a great deal of it with your paint, you can do that with the Galkyd gel just fine, but I would caution people out there with the solvent-free option. A little goes a long way. Because if you do add, I'm just going to go ahead and do it. If I just add this whole giant amount of gel into the paint, one issue you can have is that it can get kind of wrinkly when it dries since it's a pure fat. So if you're doing these gels and you want to add a lot of gel to the paint, I would stick with the Galkyd gel option because solvent-free gel really should just be used in small amounts with your paint. Otherwise, you can end up with some very wrinkly results as the paint film dries since it's just pure oil just like solvent-free fluid. It's just safflower and soybean alkyd. So think of the solvent-free gel as a pure fat, 100% oil. Meanwhile, Galkyd gel is a mixture of soybean alkyd resin and Gamsol. So it has a little bit of solvent in it, faster drying, not as fast drying, but still better. The solvent-free gel is still better than if you were working straight from the tube. You're going to have a good result. Those are two really popular gel mediums, but I am going to showcase one more. And for those of you up in Canada, this one, you know it by a different name. Galkyd Light Gel is also known as Neo McGilp. And Neo McGilp originally was based off of the traditional Marge medium. It similar like to when you see these examples, I always love looking at Turner's work because he was known to use a lot of the old school marge, and it did yellow a lot of paintings, especially because a lot of artists had the practice of using it like a varnish, which isn't recommended nowadays because it can really yellow paintings. But the Galkyd like gel, formerly known as Neo McGilp. It's a really unique gel in the line. It's not as thick as the Galkyd and the solvent-free gel by comparison. Similar to how Galkyd and Galkyd Light are different in their consistency, the Galkyd Light gel has a more silky, very soft, much less thick and buttery. It's a wonderful glazing medium. In fact, I might actually choose ultramarine blue So you can really see the transparency you can get. This is one of my favorite glazing products because you can maintain your brush marks, but you can still get beautiful luminosity in the transparent glazes. This is just such a pretty. It's just so much more soft and silky. I love both of the two others, Galkid gel and solvent-free gel, but something that really unique about the Galkid light gel slash Neo McGilp is that it just has a really silky texture. It has a slightly longer dry time comparatively to Galkid gel. It would still be faster drying than solvent-free gel, so it's kind of lives in the middle. And it's really great because it doesn't tack up super quickly if you're painting on a hot day and you want at least several hours before things start to tack up, or even a few days. This one is really good for wet on wet and alla prima painting styles, in addition to direct styles with glazing applications. So it's just one of those really versatile gels. Presently in Canada, this is still seen as Neo McGilp and comes in a bottle rather than a tube. Just recently, it was switched to a tube rather than a bottle, and we've changed the name to have it be similar to the other Galkid mediums since its ingredients are rather similar. But just know that if you like Neo McGilp, we're not discontinuing it. It's not going away. It's just getting a fresh face and packaging where you don't have to struggle getting the gel out of the bottle anymore, which is just really helpful, especially when you are in the middle of like your flow and you're in the middle of painting and then you can't get the bottle open. That's just one of the worst. Let's set this down here. And that soybean alkyd that is in all of our products, and many of our, not all of them, but many of them, including all of these gels, the Galkyd Light, the solvent-free line, that alkyd resin is used in many of those. It's not water soluble, if anyone is wondering that. It's different from water. It's still a traditional, even though it's a modern oil, it's still a traditional oil that cleans up with Gamsol or safflower oil. If anyone's wondering if it's a different type of oil, it's actually very, very similar to your traditional oils like linseed, but it just has lots of benefits and fast dry time rate, flexibility, durability, and strong adhesion. So the alkyd-based mediums are just so great for modern painters today to have more options to paint with. It's wonderful. Okay, so next up we have cold wax. Cold wax medium. And this is kind of the wild child. And it's also included in the must-haves set. You can get a small little container of cold wax. And sometimes people get the set and they're not quite sure what to do with the cold wax. What is this for? And it's so different than all of the other mediums. So let's first just go over what is cold wax? Like how is it different? I'm gonna show up here. We've run out of palette paper, so we're just gonna paint right on the table for this part. Up here, we have a little bit of cold wax dispensed, and you can see it has a very thick structure to it, very crisp. Its main ingredient is just pure beeswax. Just beeswax and Gamsol are the two main ingredients to cold wax medium. And for that reason, think of it as very lean. It is the opposite of like a linseed oil or a more flexible binder. it detracts from the flexibility of the paint rather than increasing it. For that reason, cold wax is really well suited for panel supports, inflexible, rigid boards, wood panel, aluminum. We highly recommend that you use those if you use a lot of cold wax because it does detract the flexibility of the paint. You can use it on stretched canvas if you're using no more than 1/3 in mixture with your oil paint. But if you start going beyond that on stretched fabric, you can have cracking in the long-term result. So paint on panels with cold wax. And for our demonstration, I'm going to add some radiant blue into the cold wax. The other big feature is that it makes the paint dry matte rather than glossy. A majority of oil painting mediums increase gloss and make things really juicy and really shiny. Cold wax kind of just does the opposite in that regard as well, where it's going to make the paint really matte, flat when it dries, and very just have no sheen. You still have great color intensity with your pigments. However, you do not get any gloss in the end result because the wax is so just matte when it dries. For that reason, sometimes artists might use cold wax as a modification tool for their more glossy products, like linseed oil. It adds a fair amount of gloss to the paint, and you could mix in really small amounts of cold wax into any of your mediums. If it were linseed, Galkid Light, any of the Galkid gels, the cold wax is compatible across the board with all of those and can be used as a matting agent to make really glossy mediums have a lessened sheen when they dry. So it's really useful for that. A lesser known use for wax is how it can be used as a final varnish as well. And this is a fun topic people get really excited about when they hear that the wax can also be used as a varnish. You can use it as a varnish on oil paintings, acrylic paintings, mixed media. I've heard of that a lot when people do collage and mixed media and they want everything to have a nice flat sheen. It works great at evening out a surface to a flat matte shine. You can also use it on watercolor paintings as an alternative to framing with glass. So, any of you watercolor painters out there in the audience right now, I bet you might be getting excited about this because it works great on a variety of paintings. I'm going to demonstrate how it looks on a watercolor painting here so you can kind of get a better idea of how that behaves. Always get a really soft lint-free rag, not a paper towelette, nothing like that. And we're gonna just put a little bit of wax on the cloth. I'm not scooping a dollop. I'm just gently patting the surface of this wax to transfer a small amount onto the cloth. So you don't want to put too much on your cloth because that can really be hard to spread evenly. You may even want to warm the wax just ever so slightly, maybe in a sunny windowsill, or put it in some hot tap water because softening it can make it easier to spread out as a varnish. You don't want to melt it. You're just wanting to warm it up. And our studio here has such nice lighting that it is already a little bit warm in here. So my wax is actually like the perfect temp, like just above room temperature to make it really nice to spread on a painting. And you then just go directly onto it. Some people consider an isolation barrier before this application. While not necessary, it would make it removable in the future. I always mention that to folks with if you apply the cold wax to your oil painting or your acrylic painting, it is reversible and removable with Gamsol. But for watercolor, if you're using it in this, consider it a more permanent application. because removing it might damage watercolor paint. Or if you seal it first with either some type of fixative or an isolation barrier, those can make it so you can remove the wax at a later point in time. Some people like that, some people don't mind at all if the varnish is removable or not, but we always like to mention that in case someone wants to know if they can take it off at a later date. What I like is that this really maintains the color. It doesn't chalk out the paint at all. You still, in a thin layer, you still get really nice bright color in your paint, but it does make it water resistant if, God forbid, someone spilled cranberry juice on your painting, it would roll right off and it wouldn't stain your hard work. And although it isn't as protective as glass framing is, it does offer a barrier against dust, dirt, grime, like other types of atmospheric debris that can accumulate on your painting's surface with age. The wax acts as a nice little barrier in between the physical paint and any type of dirt or dust that would accumulate on it later on. All right, I think this is looking great. You actually don't need very much wax at all in order to do this. And for anyone out there that, has never seen cold wax or heard of it before, we have a pretty great section of the website dedicated to cold wax. Go to gamblincolors.com and it's under the main menu, under our oil painting menu. It has its own special page. And the name cold wax comes from the encaustic wax, which is fused with heat to surfaces, whereas with this, Gamsol acts as the heat substitute. Sometimes people worry about if cold wax is going to cause their paintings to melt, since they're thinking it's like a beeswax candle now. You don't need to worry about that necessarily. Like if you hang a painting made with cold wax in a sunny window lit area, or someone that is somewhere like near a fireplace or something like that, you do not need to worry about it melting off of the surface. However, if it were to get above 95 degrees Fahrenheit or over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, the wax will start to soften. So, as a precaution, you wouldn't want to store paintings made with cold wax in a car on a hot day with the windows up, because the interior temperature of a car can get really warm within just 20 minutes. But if you have a painting with cold wax and it's in a sunny location, it's not going to melt, rest assured. Yeah, this is so satisfying to varnish this. I mentioned too how, and you can see some examples on our article online where we talk about cold wax as a varnish. You can use this on 3D objects as well. You can use it on wood, metal, mixed media collage, paper mache, all sorts of things. And that is the nice part about the wax, is it could go really well on a three-dimensional object and not just a flat painting. Um, and it's easier to control since you can selectively apply it. We sometimes talk to artists where they just glazed one area of their painting and then that area is really, really glossy compared to the rest. And while you don't necessarily always have to varnish the whole painting, you could use the wax in a particular area. If there were a hot spot on the painting or like a really glossy area you just wanted to knock back, it would be really useful for that type of application. So yeah, cold wax. Anyone out there who's never checked this out before, this might be for you. And if you are a cold wax painter, we love cold wax painters. In fact, it's like its own genre of painting in a way, which is very interesting. How cold wax on its own has sort of become a new subcategory of medium. You have oil paint and then you have oil and cold wax. And you might see that at the gallery sometimes when the materials are listed on the description for a painting. It may very well you have, or you will sometime in the future see that with cold wax. Now, our more known varnish that we offer at Gamblin is our Gamvar. Gamvar Picture Varnish, which comes in a gloss, a satin, and a matte finish. I'm partial to the gloss because it really makes your paintings just get this beautiful color saturation in them. Robert Gamblin really collaborated closely with the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. back in the late 80s when investigating varnishes and thinking about what varnish would best serve oil painters. And it's so much safer to use and archival compared to the Damar resin varnishes of the past that required 6 months curing time, yellowed your painting, and were formulated with really strong solvents like turpentine. Gamsol is so different because the Gamvar is different because it's made with Gamsol. Very mild. You usually only need to wait 2 to 3 weeks on average. If you're going to be varnishing your painting, you don't need to wait an extensive amount of time for thin paintings. You can varnish much sooner. Thicker, more impasto paintings, you still might be waiting maybe a month or two, but you don't need to wait for the 6 month curing before you can safely apply something like Gamvar to your artwork. It's non-yellowing and it's removable in the future is another thing, which is really, really great. The synthetic resin is just so gentle on paintings, giving them luminosity and depth without causing any damage in the long-term results. So highly recommend it. If you've never seen Gamsol or Gamvar before, you might really like it because it's one of the easiest ways to make your painting look better. Um, so we're going to show you a little varnish demonstration today. Um, and this painting here has relatively thick texture, but nothing crazy. Nothing crazy. I would say pretty average. So this style of painting here, you would usually be waiting 2 to 3 weeks on average before you could safely varnish with Gamvar on this style of brushwork. Again, if it were really thick, you might want to wait a few more weeks or a month longer. A good way to tell is if you take your fingernail and gently press it into the thickest area of your painting. You want to make sure it's not still squishy, that it's at least started to form a skin and firm up. It doesn't need to be brittle as a bone, but it should just not be very malleable under it. And for impasto painters, you know, I would say if you are an impasto painter and you want to use varnish on your work, sometimes a combination of the Galkid gel I mentioned earlier and the cold wax together around a 50-50 mixture of cold wax and Galkid gel, that's a really excellent medium for impasto painters that are wanting to use a varnish on their painting because it dries much more quickly and thickly than if you were going to be just using paint it by itself from the tube. Oh, I got to take a moment here to show off to everyone this Gamvar varnish brush. We worked with the folks at Trekell in California to develop this because we were always asked, what's the right brush to use with Gamvar? And this is the one. This brush has softer synthetic bristles. It's not a natural bristle brush, and it has the right amount of stiffness, but it's not too soft to adequately get the right amount of varnish on your painting. And if you can't get this exact brush, what I highly recommend you do is look for something that's a similar style, that's very thin and very flat. Avoid sponge brushes, foam brushes, or big mop brushes because those can just deposit way more varnish than you need, or it deposit it unevenly, as you're going to see soon here when I show how to varnish this painting. The other thing you want to keep in mind too is that you don't want to overload the brush. So I poured a very, very small amount of Gamvar gloss into this little tin here. There's barely any at the bottom of the tin. And when I go to load my brush up, I'm just going to very gently get the tip of my brush wet, just really the first little bit of the brush. I'm not dunking it into a big bowl. And please do not pour the varnish directly from the bottle or your tin onto the painting. Always brush it on. Pouring it onto your painting, while that can make a really, really fun video for social media or something, is not the way to varnish your painting. And you're probably going to end up using way more than you need if you do that. So after we load it up with just a little bit of varnish, I'm first going to unload the brush across the painting, really just depositing it like that. And then next, I'm going to start scrubbing it out in every direction. So unlike other varnishes that you might be familiar with, where the application is very uniform in terms of a horizontal or a vertical application, Gamvar application is very different because you're scrubbing it and feathering it out in all possible directions. Having good lighting is a real lifesaver, so you can see if you're running out of varnish on your brush. Be sure to pay attention to the edges of your painting and really scrub it out to the end. What's nice too about Gamvar is how it's made with Gamsol, and Gamsol does not evaporate away very rapidly. Unlike other solvents, it has a relatively slow evaporation rate. So this varnish is not going to start tacking up and drying on me really quickly. If you're ever in the process of varnishing a really big painting, you may be familiar with how some other varnishes that set up so quickly, you have to really rush and you can't make a single mistake. And one of the really forgiving parts about Gamvar is how it does not tack up super quick. And if you're just taking your time, even on a small or a large painting, you don't have to feel rushed or like that you need to hurry along. You can just kind of take your time and enjoy the process. Ooh, and what I really like too is how I literally only had to dip my brush once, just once. And this whole painting has been varnished with one single dip of the brush. So keep that in mind with Gamfar. A little goes a long way. This tiny bottle would cover an 8 by 10 foot painting, approximate, with this whole bottle here. And that's the smallest size we carry. Now, sometimes people will be, you can be varnishing and you might get really excited. It is exciting. Once you get it down and it's no longer scary, it can be really exciting to varnish your painting after so many hours of hard work. It's sort of the chef's kiss at the end. However, it is so exciting, you can sometimes get a little heavy-handed and maybe get too much on your painting. I've been there. We've all probably been there. If you ever find yourself in that situation, always keep some rags or some paper towels handy on the side, and I would just blot my brush off really well. This is another reason why it's so important to not overload your brush when you're applying this product, is because you want the ability to remove it out of the bristles with a rag, and then you can keep lightly sweeping and covering the surface. This is really important for more textured applications where you have a lot of nooks and valleys and little nooks and crannies all over that can be harder to get into. You want to make sure nothing is pooling, nothing is collecting in excess, and that you have a really even very thin application of product. Now, one thing people might, since we did talk about cold wax earlier as a varnish as well, sometimes when cold wax painters use a lot of cold wax with their paint, you actually would not want to use Gamvar at all in that situation. And you would want to instead varnish with cold wax. No, I think I got all of this off very well. I always double check. You don't want to be sorry later if you put too much varnish on your painting. That can spell disaster. I'm being dramatic actually, because the varnish is always removable. There really isn't anything to worry about if you get too much on your painting. You can just take it off later and restart. If you do apply Gamvar too heavily, I'd say the most common thing that might happen is that it'll always have a slightly sticky, slightly tacky feel, even when it's been weeks and weeks and weeks down the road since you applied it. We sometimes get that on our tech support line where someone has applied it and it's been a month or two and the varnish is still kind of tacky. That's an indication that you may have applied it a little bit too thick. So thin is better. And you really just only need one application, just one single application. And then that'll take about 24 hours to dry. Um, Never longer than that. If your varnish is going to be um, tacky after 24 hours, you've probably applied it a little bit too thickly. And in terms of removability, you can remove it at any time if you want. You could look at it the next day and say, I don't like how that turned out. And it's always going to be removable with Gamsol. You can always take it off. If it were the next day, the next week, the next year, or even 10 years down the road, you can still always remove the varnish if you decide you want to continue painting. That is important. If you want to make changes to your varnished painting, you would want to remove it first and not paint on top of the Gamvar or the cold wax if you're using either of those as a varnish. Or if you just decide, maybe I want to go for something with a little less gloss or something else, you're always able to remove it at any point, and you don't actually have to wait if you do decide you want to take it off. All right. I could varnish paintings all day. Would you guys want to watch that? Now, if you're ever wondering how to remove this, it's very, very simple. We have an excellent video demonstration at our website at gamblincolors.com. We also have step-by-step tutorial, but essentially what you would be doing is using Gamsol and a soft rag to just really gently dissolve and wipe off the varnish. Keep in mind that Gamsol is not strong enough to harm your painting. If you're worried that taking the varnish off is going to damage your paint, at least if it's an oil painting or an acrylic painting, the Gamsol isn't going to be strong enough. It's what's in Gamvar to begin with. The Gamvar contains Gamsol. And it's one of the reasons why you don't have to wait so long is because of how mild that solvent is. You just simply reactivate the dry varnish with Gamsol on a rag, and then you wipe it off with a dry, clean rag. And it's incredibly easy to remove. I often joke with people about how removing it is easier than applying it in some circumstances, which is quite funny. So varnish is probably something we get asked about more than any other topic at Gamblin, at least on our technical support line. And anyone out there that has more varnish questions, a large chunk of the real estate of our website is devoted to Gamvar with some really great FAQ pages that might answer any of you that have more questions on it out there. Check out the FAQ page for Gamvar because you very well will likely find your answer there. Or if you don't, you're very welcome to follow up with us individually. Okay, next, we're going to change gears a little bit here now. So, not every painting you make is going to be your best masterpiece. I definitely feel that way a lot, where I might look at a painting and just really wonder what went wrong there. And you could have a really nice canvas or a really nice support that you want to reuse. Our oil ground product that we have is it's a great primer for if you're preparing your own surfaces. Gamblin oil ground works great on both canvas and panel supports. Compared to acrylic gesso, it just has such a better experience for oil painters. Specifically, this is for oil paint. You can't use acrylic or other water-based paint on an oil ground. But this product here is just designed for oil painters. And compared to an acrylic gesso, you have a much lessened rate of absorbency in that regard. So your colors don't sink in as much. They stay vibrant and saturated. Anyone out there that works with a lot of iron oxide or black or does a lot of really thin washes with deep paints, you're familiar with what happens when the paint goes all sunken and just loses its life. The way you prime your surface can really help prevent that in the end result. And then one of the other great things about oil ground is how it can be used to cover up paintings, which is one of my favorite things about it. And here we just have a little sample painting. I think this was from a previous demonstration with gel. And I'm going to grab a little bit of it out of the tin. It is a lot thicker in consistency compared to acrylic gessos. And if you are in the process of switching from an acrylic gesso type primer to an oil ground, that can sometimes be a little surprising at first, is just how much thicker and denser it is. Not to worry though, you can always thin it more with additional Gamsol. It already has some Gamsol in it, along with the same soybean alkyd resin that's in our oil painting mediums like Galkyd and Galkyd Light. But this is formulated with a very, very high pigment load of titanium dioxide. So you only need two coats. Some people are just fine with one coat actually, because the power and the coverage is so nice with the high pigment load in this. You don't need a lot, in fact. And one other thing I really love doing with the oil ground too is you can tint it with oil paint. You could just use it straight from the can and get a really nice bright white surface, and that's great for luminosity within all your painting layers. But if you like to start with a like a neutral or a tonal wash, you can sometimes have a little shortcut and skip that step by tinting it. And here I'm tinting it with burnt sienna. I think that's just like a really lovely result when these get mixed together. It's like a really nice warm primer. Just mix it up in there nice. And when you're applying this, you're going to be using something that's not a brush. Instead of using, like, most people think of brushes for their acrylic gesso, this product is much better suited for a blade or some type of thin plastic for application purposes. Here we have the new Gamblin ground and gesso blade, which came out just a few years ago, and we designed this to be like a tool to help you spread the ground on really, really nice and thinly onto surfaces. There we go. And you can just spread it out and cover up the old painting that was on there. It collects on the bottom, so you can keep depositing it. And what's really nice is how this blade has a little bit of flex to it, so you can control the pressure unlike a rigid knife. Now, the other thing people run into when they're switching from acrylic primers to an oil ground is that it takes longer to dry because it's oil based. Makes sense, right? Well, because it is an alkyd oil, it doesn't take terribly long to dry, but you still will usually be waiting at least a few days on average in between coats, or at least 2 to 3 days, I would say, before you start your painting. Especially if you're the type of painter that uses a lot of solvent in your initial wash stages. You may even want to give it 5 to 7 days to dry before you start a really washy, solvent heavy initial underpainting application because you don't want that solvent to reconstitute or reactivate your ground layer. The drier it is, the warmer and the less humid you are, the faster it will dry too. So your environment can play a pretty crucial role in the waiting time. I often recommend if you're using this, try to prime a bunch of surfaces all at once so that that way you're not always repeating this and not always having to do it over and over and over again throughout the year. Set up a little bit of time to just prime a bunch of surfaces, let them dry in between layers, and then they'll be ready to go throughout the year. Now you can see with this first coat, there's still a little bit of that ultramarine blue peeking through because I'm applying it really thinly. And that's another crucial thing for the drying rate of this product. If you like really put this on super duper thick, that will significantly prolong the drying time rate of this primer. So thinner is multiple thin coats is much better than one big thick coat if you want to be waiting the shortest possible time before you start painting. You don't want to do a really big thick coat. And if you're really worried, you're like, is it dry? I can't tell. I don't want to risk it. A really reliable way is to take like a 180 to 220 grit sandpaper and just very lightly sand like the corner or some area of your canvas or panel. And if it gums up on the sandpaper, that's an indication you're probably looking at least another day or two before you can start painting or apply your second coat. When you sand, if it comes off in a nice fine powder, then that's your green light that you're ready to go. You can either start with another application or you can get to painting. Yeah. Well, that was nice. That just priming and varnishing and color mixing are just some of my favorite things to do. So I'm glad all of you guys are here today with me to watch and revel in it. That is the conclusion of our product demonstration. However, I'm sure many of you had some questions that you submitted in the chat, and I was trying to answer some as well while presenting, but if the folks at Delta want to share some questions, and if we do have time, I've personally lost track of time, but if we have time, we would be happy to address some audience questions at this point.
One of the
Are we?
questions that was
Uh-huh.
asked
Uh-huh.
is the solvent-free gel just oil and fumed silica?
That's a great question. Yes, that is technically correct. It is made comprised of two oils, the soybean alkyd resin oil and safflower oil. That's the same ingredients that are in the fluid version of the solvent-free medium. And then to make solvent-free gel a thicker consistency, we use a fumed silica. That's absolutely right. That's the only difference between the solvent-free fluid and the solvent-free gel is the thickening agent. That's a good question. That was a really great ingredient question.
Otherwise, you answered the bulk of the other questions throughout, which has been great.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I know from experience that you might think of a question like next week or even a few months, who knows, maybe it's a year down the road and you got a question from us. Everyone is always welcome to get in touch. We always try to be accessible to answer questions, whether that's over email, if you want a phone call, if you would like your own one-on-one video demo, we also provide that on a scheduled basis. So if you think of another question later on down the road, don't hesitate to reach out. My email's really easy to remember. It's my name, Mary, Mary, at gamblincolors.com, and it's the American spelling of colors, Colors, Mary at gamblincolors.com, or head on over to the website contact page. We have an email submission form there too if you just want to leave a note or a question there. Either way, we're always happy to help out with questions, or if you just want to share with us what you're working on, what you're making with your paint, either email or tagging us on social media. We love seeing what people are working on, and it's just always amazing to see the work that's produced with our product range. It really does have a wide amount of uses. And anyone out there, if you end up trying the must-have set, we covered everything that was in this today, from Gamsol, linseed, solvent-free gel, cold wax, Galkid Light, and Gamvar. And now you have a better idea of what lays in store for you if you pick up this set. Thanks again to Delta Art for inviting us, and we had a great time. And everyone who was able to attend live or everyone watching this later, thank you so much. And we can't wait for the next ones. Yeah. Oh, we have another question.
Yes, the question is not quite the focus of this demo, but are there plans to expand the Reclaimed Colors line?
Oh, I bet you someone noticed our beautiful reclaimed earth set here that's been on the front of the camera. If anyone's already unfamiliar with this concept, reclaimed earth color is a very unique project that is from Ohio University. A genius artist named John Sabra came to Gamblin over a decade ago to share about how acid mine drainage was heavily polluting the Ohio River system in his local area. And he developed a facility that is able to filter the sediment, the toxic sediment that kills all marine and aquatic life in the riverbeds, remove the pigment from the rivers, heat it to different colors, and then came to Gamblin asking us if we could make it into a paint. If you've never checked them out, at our website, the Reclaimed Earth Colors, you can see all three: brown ochre, rust red, and iron violet. The iron violet in particular is my favorite, and I think we could very well expand it in the future. Because there's so many at the different levels that you heat the pigment changes the color, and that is just endless possibilities there. So yes, we would love to do more in the future. And the original reclaimed color is actually our Torrid Gray oil paint. And I know a lot of longtime Gamblin fans out there are probably familiar with Torrid. In fact, for a lot of people, this is their introduction to Gamblin, is when they get a free sample of Torrid, because it's always a sample. You can never purchase it. We make Torrid by reclaiming all of the pigments from our air filter here at the Gamblin factory. All year round, it's going 24/7 to keep our workers safe so they don't breathe in pigment dust. And then once a year, it needs to be cleaned. And instead of seeing all of that perfectly usable, beautiful pigment go into the landfill, we remake it into oil paint. And every year it's a little different depending on the colors or maybe the mood artists were buying. Some years it's more green, some years it's more brown, or it'll be lighter or darker. And it can even vary from tube to tube within the same year. We usually release Torrid in the fall. We encourage people to inquire with their local retailer because they need to opt in to having the sample. But usually that's what it is when you buy Gamblin paint during the Torrid promotional period, you get a free sample of it. And it's always a sample. You cannot buy it. So it's a very, very special paint. Yeah.